Hi, welcome to Product Elevation 2022, and I am presenting Survival Metrics. It's a methodology that helps teams pivot instead to change instead of planning to failure. If you notice, the two icons above mean something. One is this is going to be a workshop for you to get the most out of this talk. You'll need to take some sort of notes. There are going to be places where I ask you to think about things. And so it's important that you write that stuff down. And secondly, 5 stars, leave a review. I'm not trying to bias you, but I would like for you to fill out a review of this talk and give me feedback. Without feedback, I don't get better. This talk doesn't get better. And so I want to understand your perspective. What made you want to watch this talk? And yeah, let's get right into it. I have a question. Does your team trust you? And I want you to sit with that for a second, because trust is very important as it relates to how your team is going to operate. How important? Depending on various studies will tell you that trust has a 60% impact on team efficacy. Now, think about doing a student project where it was 60% of your grade to do that one thing. It pretty much means everything else is irrelevant. If you don't nail that one thing, then you're probably not going to make an impact on the project. And that's really important. Trust is really important because we think product development is a straight line, straight and to the right. When in truth, product development more looks like this, where the graph goes up and down and up and down and up and down and up and down. And as you're going through those downs, it's really important for you to understand each other and trust each other. And failure is going to happen because, as Dr. Ron Kohavi, who ran innovation at Airbnb, Microsoft, and Amazon, tells us, 60 to 90% of ideas do not improve the metrics they were intended to improve. Why is this important? Why is this slide so important? Because when you're trying to build product, if there isn't a positive motion with what you built, you failed in some way, shape, or form. And to keep something is to keep junk. It's to keep maintenance. There's no such thing as a free lunch. And so the ideas that do not improve metrics, even if they're neutral, are dangerous to keep around. Keep in mind, 60 to 90% of ideas do not improve the metrics they were intended to improve. And so we deal with a lot of failure, and trust is our steady hand. That's our 60%. If we can just get through that 60%, just like school, you've passed. And that's where survival metrics comes into play. Survival metrics are a tool that helps us as product professionals take an idea and put it into these 3 buckets, whether it's an idea that we want to invest in, an idea that we want to stop, or an idea that we want to pivot from. It's a way to operationalize your strategy so you do not fall into the sunk cost problem. What is the sunk cost problem? Sunk cost, for those who don't know, is a natural thing our brains do when we have worked on something for very long. See, if we worked on something, we believe it has to go through. And without some sort of motion going back the other way, you're going to be stuck in your default mode, which is going to be a sunk cost, which means things aren't going to change. And if you think about it for a minute, if you think about that statement, 60 to 90% of ideas do not bring positive value. They bring negative or neutral value. And you think about the idea of sunk costs, and you look at your roadmap, how much of what you just looked at fit into that 60 to 90%, and how much is mucking up the works just because you feel like you have to launch the thing, right? You've already put the work in. And so I want you to think about that over the next minute. Think about what sunk cost do you hate that you have right now. Think about the last sunk cost you experienced, the thing you held on for way too long. And so leverage the chat. If you want, talk about it. But we're going to do this over the next 45 seconds. One second. And think about that. Think about the sunk cost. Keep that in the back of your head as we go into story time. I want to take you back to 2015. And I want to introduce you to a company named Bobco. Now, Bobco had things going pretty well for themselves. They were a bootstrap company. They had about $6 million of profit in the bank. They had pretty solid NPS scores across the board, and they had a workforce that trusted leadership. You couldn't walk through Bobco without talking to somebody that has been there for 3, 4, 5, 6 years, at least. And people intended to work there for the rest of their lives. They thought they had a business that was going to be just great, something sustainable. And so they led them down to these two paths. Like, they had plenty of opportunities to go chase something. And so they decided to just go chase it. They looked at these two paths, the two paths being this new technology called artificial intelligence, and this other path in terms of rechanging their architecture. And they decided to do both. They didn't make a decision. They were trapped in that decision fatigue, and they thought, why not do it all? Why not just go in and just try to take the bull by the horns? Let's do this. And what happened to them 2 years later? There were layoffs. And I don't have to tell you that layoffs kill trust. If there was one thing that kills trust in teams, it'll be layoffs. And with those two ideas, they had positive cash flow, customer satisfaction, and high morale. They went to hemorrhaging cash, confused customers, and low internal trust. And as a result, Bobco internally was just ripped apart. They were unsure if they could make decisions. So their ability to make decisions were slowed down tremendously. Everything went to a crawl. They had no data clarity. Everything was a gut-based decision. And since they didn't talk, well, teams didn't know what data to trust. And then company values weren't applied. So things felt flimsy when times got hard, just like now, where they looked at these things on the wall. They look at these words on the wall, and they don't see anything being applied to anything. And so how often is this? Is Bobco a lone example? No, not really. There are a whole lot of startups that where if they don't pick a problem, they tend to find themselves just lost in the wilderness, all the way through to the market rejecting them. In fact, this is upwards of 35 to 42% of companies fail because of this inability to get off of work or trying to take on too much. And so they eat up so much risk, unnecessary risk, by just laying on the sunk costs. They just say, we got this, we've done it before, and we're just going to power through. When in fact, as we well know, that power through leads to layoffs. And this is something extremely relevant right now because we're at over 50,000 layoffs for tech employees in this last 6 months. 50,000. The ability to understand what's useful and what is not is extremely important because it's the ability to keep people having jobs. And the one resource that you cannot get back, which is time. Bobco wastes time. If you're unable to pick, you waste time. If you're unable to pivot, you waste time. And time you cannot get back. Remember, 60 to 90% of ideas do not improve the metric they were intended to improve. That means 60 to 90% of ideas waste time. Not that they're bad, and we're going to talk about why that is, but if you're able to take these ideas and then adjust based on what the market is telling you, what your customers are telling you, and do so authentically, not just the lip service that we tend to help, but actually dig in and do the work, you can find massive opportunity. Let's take a look at some companies that have done so. For example, Slack started as a gaming company, then it became the chat company that a lot of us know. Nintendo was a playing card company, then they became a video game company, which we all know. And then lastly, Twitter started off as podcasting software, and now it's a daily grievance generator. There's enough for everyone. Because they're able to pivot, we're all able to scream. And so by avoiding that sunk cost and operationalizing the pivots that we do, there is massive opportunity for us to be better. And so what pivot is top of mind? Take the next minute and think about what pivot is available today to you. What change can you make right now based on the information that we just learned? Oh, so keep that pivot top of mind. And combine it with that sunk cost. Where can you operate? What can you change? Keep that in mind as we go through these next few slides. So we talked about layoffs. We talked about change. Now let's talk about trust and why building trust is important. Remember that 60% that we talked about, it's all about trust. And so how do you build trust? There are 8 ways to build trust. This is according to Paul Jacek, a neurologist that could help me one day learn how to talk, a neurologist that focuses on human interaction. So there are 8 things according to him. 1 is to recognize excellence. 2 is to induce challenge stress. 3 is to give people discretion in how they do their work. 4 is what they call job crafting. How do you give people some choice? 5, share information broadly. 6, intentionally build relationships. 7, facilitate whole person growth. And 8, show vulnerability. Now, these 8 things are close to what I've experienced in work, where if you're able to do these 8 things, you're able to change and change effectively. This is the foundation of change. And for that, I call the 3 things I've learned in my career on that, the 3 pillars of change. You can be fast. Being fast recognized as excellence, gives people discretion on how they do their work, it gets job crafting. You can be data informed, which gives discretion, shares information broadly, and induces challenge stress. And you can be politically safe, which facilitates growth, builds relationships, and show vulnerability. And this is important, right? These things are important. If you can do these 3 things on a regular basis, if you can check in on these things, it really facilitates this, which is the Agile Manifesto. If you ever wondered what the Agile Manifesto is, here you go. It's not a lot. It's these words: individuals and interactions over processes and tools, working software over comprehensive documentation, customer collaboration over contract negotiation, and responding to change over following a plan. The whole point of the Agile Manifesto is to get us to think about the customer themselves and how do we respond to the work that is going to be infinitely complicated and complex. We're dealing with humans and products. Both of these things take a lot of time to understand, and you're not going to get right. And so survival metrics really helps us to respond to change over following a plan. This is a way for you to optimize, to operationalize the concept. And this is why where the pillar of change is the foundation of that operationalization. you need to be fast, you need to be data informed, you need to be politically safe. If you can do those three things, well, you're able to operationalize change. So let's talk about these three things and how they affected Bobco. Because remember, in 2015, Bobco was great. They were on top of the world. And then by the time we got to 2017, things were really bad. And so what ends up happening when these things happen inside of companies, whether they've been around for a long time or a short time, is product tends to get their heads chopped, right? That's when there's a new product team in town and they have to go change the culture. And so for this, there was a head of product named Jill. And Jill came in with a mandate to change the product culture, the culture of the product development org. And this is important. She came with a strategic mandate, which means the PMs for her and the PMs in which report to her have the opportunity to do strategy work, right? If you're a product manager that has no responsibility in the strategy, this may not help as much. Now, there are some things you can pull from this talk to help you make decisions. However, at the end of the day, you need to have some control over strategy. Because with that control, you're able to start moving fast. So let's talk about moving fast. Remember, moving fast lets you recognize excellence, induce challenge and stress, and give teams discretion. By moving fast, what do we mean? We mean decision velocity. You need to move fast with your decision velocity. And your decision velocity increases when you make small, predefined, and clear decisions. Let's define those terms. Smaller decisions. Those smaller decisions help teams think quickly by limiting the range of options. You don't want to give somebody all day to choose these things. You got this thing or that thing. They're pre-made. Teams do not have to think about the definition of these choices, right? These small decisions, these are decisions that are pre-made that you can understand just by looking at them. And then they need to be simple. Break down the decision as simply as you can. You want to understand what is underneath the decisions that you're making. There are a lot of problems with teams when it comes to decision velocity, having decisions be too complex. Because then you can't think, you can't share information, you can't iterate, and you can't give people the way to move. So make sure those decisions are simple. And so for FAST, for us, in survival metrics, what does this mean? You have three decisions that you can make. If something is worth stopping the initiative for, the metrics are to stop statements. You stop completely. There's no question about what stop means. It means stop. For companies, are folks that understand the Toyota method, right? The pulling of the cord, the red cord, to stop the production line. This is the same thing. These are the things of that level of magnitude. Next are things that lead us to reconsider the direction where we're going, are pivot statements. How do we change? Pivot statements allow us to change direction. We come back when it's time, when it's relevant, when we're checking in order to change direction and which we're going. We need to start thinking about what's happening. And then lastly, anything that signals you to lean into the initiative as much as you can is an invest statement. It's not just the things that are bad that we need to stop. There are things that are good, and we miss opportunities if we don't jump on them when we can. That is an invest statement. And when Jill applied this in the PMs that she hired, teams were unsure if they could even make decisions. So there was a lot of complex decisions that were hanging out. And in 2019, since they did the work to change the culture there, they were able to do what I think mature companies do, is kill projects. If your decision flow is open as the way it should be, if decisions are simple, you're able to get very clear on the bright rules of your team. And so once you get those bright rules or rules that are very clear, straightforward, set up for your team, then teams know or feel confident in shutting down things before they waste any more time. So when you're in a company where this works, you will see projects killed all the time. Remember, because 60 to 90% of ideas bring neutral or negative value, which means you should be killing often. And so I worked with a SaaS company that was very much like Bobco. They were very unsure of how and where they could make decisions. And once implementing this faster decision velocity, the decision velocity increased so much they were shipping 6 times faster with the same group. Right? I've worked at companies where we've applied some version of faster decision making, faster decision velocity, where you've gotten upwards of 7 or 8 times faster with the same people with less stress. A lot of it is just based on communication. How can we get in front of things and in front of these decisions before they're made, or as they're made, or even after they're made? Next is being data informed. How do we increase our data literacy? And so when we talk about being data informed, it means we're giving discretion, we're sharing broadly, and we're inducing challenge stress. We are not hiding the problem. It's very important for teams to be data informed. It's extremely important that they do not hide the challenge. We're facing what we're facing, and hiding it and not giving people the right context will lead them to make bad decisions. So induce the challenge stress. What are we facing? Let's be clear. And so you'll increase the data information around the company by surfacing those decisions, being clear about the type of data you're looking for and what you're leaving, and leaving a decision trail. Let's break those down. Surfacing decisions. All data that changes the status of a product should be put in front of the team. All data, good, bad, and different. Get in front of it and make those decisions clear to everyone. How are we making these decisions? We got to be clear on the data type. Are we looking at things like quantitative or over qualitative? If we are, then we need to treat those types of data differently, because they give us different types of data and give us different type of understanding. You need both, but you need to be clear on what type you're looking at. And then you need a decision trail. Write out your decisions. What's important? Before you make the decision, put that away. Take a look at it the next time you do a retro or a pre-mortem or a post-mortem, and adjust. You can't get better at decision making by just keeping it in your head. You have to go out and you have to leave a trail. You need to have something in which you can build on. And so let me leave a note here about being data driven. I don't like teams being data driven, because data driven means you're taking a look at pretty much one type of data, which is quantitative, and you're just driving based on those things. It's the inability to think through things, right? Because the data is driving us one way. Let's not be data driven. Let's be data informed. Allows us to take other forms of data to increase our ability to be more accurate, more confident. Some data is better than no data. And what I mean by that, some data is sometimes teams take a look at quantitative data and then they don't look at any other types, which means they're missing the context that comes from some qualitative data like stories, or watching customers just do things and just asking questions. And so let's get away from being data driven. It's important to understand your numbers, but also it's really important to engage with the art of the work. So let's take a look at a potential survival metric. There's a pivot statement here. If the AWS bill is projected to jump more than 10% due to a production release, we will need to discuss ways to lower the projected bill immediately. This is in reference to Bobco, where they were having trouble with their infrastructure program, and the fact that it was costing them a lot of money. The bill for AWS was going out of whack, and so they needed to understand consistently where they were. Now, if you just tell the operations teams that, they can, but that doesn't just affect what the operations team does. It affects how engineers code, how product managers make decisions, how designers design. This is important, so it needs to be in front of teams. And that's what's important. Recognize the challenge stress, put it in front of people. Put it in front. In 2017, there was no data clarity, gut-based decisions, led teams confused on what data to trust. Nobody could say they were wrong. And once we got to 2019, they were able to put the data up front, and the confidence of the data increased the tensions early in the projects. You'll know this is working because people will argue. We avoid the tension, avoid the argument, avoid the good stuff. What do you call the good stuff? That feeling, right? That I'm right, here's my data, here's what I'm seeing. When you avoid that, when you don't induce the challenge stress, you'll end up prematurely converging and everybody leaving with different thoughts. Jeff Bezos does this well at Amazon. Disagree and commit. Bring the right information in and just get to it. Get to the tension. Understand each other's points of view. And then once that decision is made, let's run with it. And so I worked with a social impact startup that wasn't sure on how to define a project was break even or profit driven. They were hiding challenge stress. And so what happened is I worked with them and we created a baseline for projects that allowed teams to be margin conscious. This helped them raise money. So if you're thinking about raising money, if you're thinking about bringing in financing, being very clear about if something is an investment or is driving towards profit is very clear. You want to get that in front of people and you want to not hide that challenge stress. You want to tell people what's on the line. And so let's go to being politically safe. And so what is political safety? Political safety means you're facilitating growth, you're showing vulnerability, and you're building relationships. You increase that political safety in your teams by living your values, combining culture with data, and making sure every voice is heard. Be values driven, right? Iterate, reiterate, engage, change, build on your values repeatedly. You don't want these to be signs on the wall. You want them to be impacted in your company's DNA. That does not happen without iterating and engaging in your values repeatedly. Are they showing up in the work? Should be a question you ask. Culture and data should not be politicized, right? We want to induce this challenge stress and we want to show vulnerability. We're all on the same team here. How do we do that? We show our data. And for leaders that are watching this talk and you're finding teams and leaders that do not want to share data, get rid of them. Because if they're not able to be vulnerable with their fellow peers, with the company itself, who are they doing this for? They're doing it for anything else. That also puts pressure on you, founder, to also do this, to be fair. Remember, this data should not be politicized. The data is the data. Let's work from that. And you want to look at true collaboration. We're all guilty. A lot of teams are guilty of this. I can't say all, but a lot of us are guilty, where we rate the teams that we talk to based on some sort of power. Are we a sales-driven company? Are we an engineering-driven company? Are we a product-driven company? Are we a marketing company? All these things mean that there are hierarchies in which the information is not being shared. That means there are safe cultures and safe teams and non-safe teams. And if you want to get to survival metrics, it's important that you drive collaboration, real collaboration with teams and build those relationships. Right? Understand what drives them. And so this stop statement is very values driven from Bobco. If we have to grab information from third-party sources to complete our chat feature, scrap the initiative and invest the resources elsewhere. This is clear. This is value. This is what gets it done. It needs to be no wiggle room. If this is something that is our values, it's our values. We keep it. Bobco in 2017 didn't feel like they were applied. Like everybody felt disconnected. So this impacts folks on the line making the decisions on a day-to-day basis, but also leadership. When these are non-aligned, you'll start seeing things like poop and swoop, where leaders will come by and just give projects off the record. Those leaders aren't seeing their values. They don't feel like they're listened to. Their team, they feel like their teams are on the outs. And I've literally talked to CEOs who feel like they aren't listened to. So this is not really conscious about a group or a particular group. This is everybody. So when this is working, leadership can feel comfortable talking about where they're getting love and where they aren't. They're able to show their vulnerability, which means they don't have to do secret projects. There's a such thing as privacy versus secrecy. Good political safety means there's a high privacy culture. We can trust people to keep the information, and they will bring what they need to bring to the table. They will make available what's important. Versus a secrecy culture, where there's a lot of poop and swoop going on. People aren't sure what drives value and how to get their value driven to the customers that they serve. And so I worked with an enterprise company where they had product and sales clashing. Stop me if you've heard that one before. And so they were unsure of each other's incentives. And after working with them, product and sales understood each other's incentives, and they were based on deal size and product strategy. They shaped what was the input, which is the deal size, and shaped their product strategy based after that. They were able to start targeting who they needed to target. Without that targeting, then they would be lost. And they would argue. And so in 2019, Bobco really got to the point where they were a lot healthier. They were healing. They implemented those pillars of change, and they were able to make something happen. Or what were those pillars? They were increasing their decision velocity. They got fast. They increased their data informedness, their data literacy. They got data informed. And then they became politically safe. They were able to talk to each other and show vulnerability. And if you want change, these are the three things that have to happen, or you will not operationalize your pivots. You will not be able to change direction. At least do so cleanly. And so I'm going to give you the next 3 minutes to think about what you just heard. Think about the pillars and write some notes. Think about your last few projects. What made things move and what didn't? Could you have been faster, more data informed, or politically safe? I'll leave you to it. All right. So we have gone through our 3 minutes, and you have been able to think about which pillar: fast, data informed, or politically safe. And yeah, let's talk about survival metrics. How do you actually do them? We've talked about the foundation. Now let's operationalize the actual metrics. And so let's start with building the story. We're human beings. We're human beings, and as human beings, we live on story. Story is important to us because without it, we're unable to really connect the dots. This is natural. This is how we've developed. Stories around the campfire have helped humanity for eons. No need to go against the river now. And so let's talk about the 5 parts of operationalizing survival metrics. First, let's go ask some questions. Each of these 3 questions are ways to clock into what each of these pillars can do. To each one of these pillars, how do they help us understand? So first, let's start with the non-negotiables for your team. We want to make sure we understand what makes this team tick. Remember, the faster we learn, the better. And so some of that is by understanding what the bright lines are. And so I use this term called bright lines because it's a specific term about having decisions that are so clear that they are not wiggle room. That's what non-negotiables are. You got to be very clear about them. Next is, how much are we willing to let this cost us? Going around and talking to teams about how much are we willing to let this cost us will give us an insight on what data that is important. You'll start to get numbers, metrics, incentives, goals. It's important to get all this stuff because we want to understand what's really driving the people around us. And lastly, we also need to know what markers do we need to know to commit more resources. What's driving what you may even call the soul of a team, right? If you understand what people need to commit to, what they want to see, you start to understand what their goals are, what would make them change direction. You ask these questions and you'll be surprised at what answers you can get. And you want to double down on the good stuff to let teams know, look, when we get the good stuff that really hits what you need hit, we'll double down. We'll move forward. And this will help teams sleep better at night because they'll know this is important. And so let's translate them. The stuff that you get a whole bunch of numbers, right? You need to turn these into statements, right? And so that's the power of analogy. That's where that comes into play. What I mean by the power of analogy is you got all this data. There are ties that bind. This is that, or that is this, right? Oh, this spend is much like last year when you did X. Could you tell me more about that? Why was that important? You start asking these questions to start getting these analogies. And these analogies will help you translate things into what matters right now. That analogy also starts to crank out what is a good metric. Once you got the analogy, you can start to think about and pick out what numbers are important. And almost every day at almost every company, strategy is being hijacked by numbers. Remember, I talked about being able to employ strategy, being in control of strategy. You need to have strategy for this stuff to work the way it needs to work. And strategy is often hijacked because of these abstract metrics that have nothing to tie back to a strategy. You start gaming it. This is called surrogation, and it destroys a lot of value. For example, there's a company called Wells Fargo. Executives there tried to track cross sales to customers to measure performance on the bank's strategy of building long-term customer relationships. This focus on cross-selling goals led employees to open up 3.5 million accounts without customer consent, which destroyed the long-term relationships that they were seeking. So remember, you have to have a strategy here. And you have to really think about what's driving folks. And you got to understand that there's a surrogation at foot. So you need to have good metrics. Bad metrics lead to surrogation. Good metrics have the following 4 characteristics. They help you determine what you know now. They help you compute the value of additional information. They measure where information value is high, and they make a decision and act on it. If you are not making a decision on a metric, it is a waste of time. It's vanity. How are you making decisions? The numbers in front of you help you make that decision. For example, this invest statement, if our beta invite population is twice our current projection, this could signal real excitement for our customers. If our invites are 200% of our projection of 1,000, we should take the time to expand the initiative, right? This fits all 4 of those things that we just talked about, what a good metric is, right? We have a decision. We have good information on the data that we use. It's all here. And again, metrics mean nothing without strategy. It's good quantitative grounding to the strategy we're selling. If you do not have a strategy, you need to figure that out first. And if you need help with that, I'm more than willing to help with those strategies, with how to build a strategy. And so in your notes after this talk, when you give feedback, let me know. We can have a conversation about strategy. What is strategy? How do you keep strategy alive in an organization? How do you combine it with survival metrics? We can talk about that. When we get to the end, when you give feedback, just send me a note and I'll give you some resources. Because without the strategy, you cannot prioritize. You got to prioritize what's in front of you. And you want to do it against your strategy and company mission. Prioritization is easy. Strategy is hard. If you're not diagnosing your problems, if you don't have guiding actions that'll help you understand if you should do this or that, and if you don't have coherent next actions, you don't have a strategy. And again, if these terms are confusing to you, if you're not sure, if you're uncomfortable, please send me a note. I would love to talk about strategy with you because it is extremely important, not just for this framework, for a lot of frameworks that you're going to use. Strategy is the silver bullet in some sense. It's very hard. It's a silver bullet, but it is extremely hard to get right and to continue getting right. Anywho, you want to start talking. It's really important that you communicate those 5 to 7 metrics that you just pulled out, you created and prioritized. You need to talk about them and talk about them often. All right? A quick way to do this is the and, but, therefore methodology in terms of story making, right? You want to start with a statement and then say, and what are our objectives? We're trying to do this and that. But what is the hard part? But in order to achieve this or that, we need to get away from the monster. Therefore, we need to get away from the monster by building fires because fires keep them away. Therefore, it's the action. Therefore, what are we doing? And so as you build out these metrics, you use this framework to tell that story. You tell it often. You'll know when you're starting to do this correctly, when you're looking at somebody and they just repeat it back to you without you saying anything, right? When they get sick of it, that's when you know you're doing it right. And so lastly, you want to loop. Like everything that finds inspiration in the Agile Manifesto, you want to iterate. You want to iterate because you may not be right. In fact, you're not going to be right. 60 to 95% of ideas do not drive value where they think they're going to drive value. So you want to talk, translate, prioritize. It's really important for you to change direction when you change direction, as you change direction, to keep your eye on the road. What will make you change direction further? So you keep going through this process, right? You just keep doing it and you keep doing it and you keep doing it. And the way you're going to start seeing it's working, are we able to react to our current circumstances fast enough to build more market share? You should start to see a lot more thrashing in the beginning, and then you should see teams starting to be able to react. They're able to take a look at what's happening in the marketplace, and they're able to move, right, based on the values. They feel strong enough in the values. Do they feel informed enough to challenge first ideas? I don't know about you, but I've never gotten a first idea correct. Are they good enough? Are they feel comfortable enough to challenge first ideas? If your first ideas are going through, that's another sign you're just falling in love with sunk cost bias. You want to get out of it. And are company values translating into initiatives? Are we making initiatives work? Are we actually building stuff that flows into our values? We do all that by recognizing the 3 pillars of change: fast, data-informed, and politically safe. And with that, survival metrics. It's really important for you to understand that once you're able to put these things into these 3 buckets, stop, pivot, and invest, the work really starts to begin in understanding what makes your company tick and how do you differentiate yourself based on yourself. And how do you avoid that sunk cost bias and build trust along the way? And that's what Survival Metric does. It helps you operationalize these changes, these pivots, to help build trust as you change, because 60 to 90% of all ideas do not drive positive value. Survival Metrics helps you get to that other side, so you're able to edify that strategy, make it stronger, and help your teams move forward. And so I talked about that. I want to give you a few minutes here to look at this QR code, to scan it with your phone. It'll lead you to a Google form. This is where you can answer all those questions. You can ask me questions. If we do not get to those questions today, you'll get an email from me that has all these questions wrapped up. So I would like for you to go into this feedback form and ask a question. ask a question. You ask that question, you're going to get a bunch of resources coming back to you as well that goes deeper into these topics. Right? There are plenty of books and articles that help you understand all of the things that we talked about today in order to build out those survival metrics. I will send that to you. Just fill out this feedback form. I'll give you a little time here. All right, thank you, and let's get on to it.